In a bustling urban city, rich in diversity, a palpable tension floats in the air, a discontent born from a history marred by abuses of authority and an unequal treatment of ethnic and socio-economic minorities. Amid this backdrop, the local police force is tasked with maintaining order and safety, yet it has become a source of distrust for many of its citizens. The narrative unfolds during an ordinary day within this charged environment, introducing us to a critical incident that would ignite a firestorm of controversy and self-reflection. As people went about their daily lives, a verbal confrontation erupted between two individuals at a city park. This seemingly minor incident quickly escalated, drawing the attention of Officer Darius, a seasoned policeman known for his strong sense of justice but also deeply rooted in the old-school mentality of loyalty to the badge above all. In a matter of moments, Officer Darius arrived at the scene, ready to intervene, his instincts alert to the chaotic energy surrounding him. However, upon assessing the situation closely, he realized that his younger colleague, Officer Caleb, was using excessive force, confronting a man who had raised his voice in what seemed to be frustration rather than aggression. Caleb's approach was aggressive and heavy-handed. He yelled at the man, a man of color named Malik, accusing him of being drunk and a nuisance, without any clear evidence to support such claims. Darius's heart sank as he witnessed this glaring display of discrimination and lack of professional decorum. In that moment, the shadows of history manifested before him, as he reflected on the inherent biases that were not just present in the individual officer's actions, but also woven into the very fabric of the police department itself. Darius felt a surge of responsibility wash over him, making it clear that he could no longer stand idly by while injustices were perpetrated under the guise of authority. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward, calling out to Caleb and asserting his authority. "Caleb, step back. This is unacceptable." The calmness in Darius's voice contrasted sharply with Caleb's aggressive demeanor. Darius's unexpected intervention shocked bystanders and fellow officers alike, revealing a fierce divide within the ranks. Some officers looked on in disbelief, while others shifted uncomfortably, caught between the desire to support a colleague and the acknowledgement of the truth behind Darius's words. In that singular instant, a confrontation unfolded that would echo far beyond the park. As the situation turned tense, violating the unspoken code of loyalty among officers, Darius confronted Caleb directly. "You are not above the law, and your racism has no place in this department," he declared, determined to uphold his duty to serve and protect every citizen, irrespective of race or background. This was not merely a clash between two individual officers. It was a representation of a broader conflict, one that challenged the very principles of justice and equality he had vowed to uphold. The silence that followed Darius's words was deafening, the air thick with anticipation of the consequences that would inevitably arise from such defiance. Caleb, faced with his superior's challenge, responded with fury. "You're going to regret this, Darius. You've betrayed us." His voice dripped with disdain as he made it clear that in his eyes, maintaining loyalty to fellow officers, even those who misused their power, was paramount. The dichotomy between Darius's belief in accountability and Caleb's view of loyalty highlighted the internal struggles within the police force, a microcosm of larger societal issues surrounding race, authority, and morality. As passers-by observed the escalating conflict, murmurs of surprise and support for Darius rippled through the crowd, some expressing agreement with Darius's stand, while others mirrored Caleb's protectiveness over the department's reputation. This confrontation, initially seen as an isolated incident, began to reflect deeper societal issues. People watching were reminded of the systemic racism that often marred law enforcement. The incident would not be easily forgotten. It would soon ripple into the community and media, inciting dialogue about police accountability and the need for reform. In a decisive moment, Darius made a choice that would challenge not only his career but the entire culture within the department. He placed Caleb under arrest, invoking protocol with a heavy heart. It was a drastic, courageous step, a statement about the zero tolerance for racial bias and misconduct within the ranks. As he handcuffed his colleague, a mixture of resentment and respect loomed over him. He was now viewed by some as a hero, while others saw him as a traitor. The ramifications were immediate. Whispers of a brewing crisis echoed through the precinct, as solidarity among officers crumbled. With Caleb's arrest, Darius unintentionally positioned himself at the epicenter of a storm that shook the foundations of the police department. Many officers rallied behind Caleb, seeing his arrest as a breach of brotherhood that threatened to engulf them all. The department's unity was fragile, tested by the chasm between those who believed in reform and those who clung desperately to their traditional notions of loyalty. As Darius navigated this turbulent terrain, he faced not only public misinterpretations of his actions but also threats and intimidation from fellow officers who felt threatened by his revelations. At this critical juncture, the police chief, Montgomery, intervened, recognizing the potential fallout from the divisive incident. Montgomery was astute. He understood that Darius had done the right thing but also acknowledged the need to restore balance within the ranks. In closed-door meetings, he sought to address the divisions, promoting open dialogue about racism, ethics, and accountability. Under Chief Montgomery's guidance, the police department began to implement widespread training initiatives focused on addressing bias, promoting empathy, and emphasizing a commitment to justice. Darius found himself at the forefront of these changes, leading sessions where officers could freely discuss their perspectives, examining the roots of discrimination and the necessity for transformation. Through these efforts, Darius salvaged not only his integrity but also fostered real change within the department, touching the lives of countless officers and citizens alike. By encouraging honest conversations, he sought to cultivate a culture that valued mutual respect and accountability, paving the way for a brighter future. In the end, what began as a single act of courage evolved into a movement for reform within the police department. Though the path was fraught with challenges, the resolution of conflict through understanding and change underscored the profound impact of individual actions on collective surroundings. Darius emerged as a symbol of hope, courage, and the necessity of fighting against injustice. More than a mere confrontation, this incident illuminated a vital truth: that integrity, when upheld, can serve as the catalyzing force for transformative change in an institution and ultimately, in society. The narrative concluded not just with resolution but with the promise of a more just future, where the cries for equality and accountability would no longer be silenced but echoed loud and clear through the hearts and minds of all. In the heart of a bustling city, where the rhythm of life moved swiftly and the hum of urban existence created a backdrop for countless stories, the local police department found itself grappling with conflicting ideologies. At the forefront of this intense atmosphere was Jim, a veteran officer whose years on the force had instilled in him an unwavering loyalty to the police institution, a belief that the badge represented an unassailable authority. For Jim, obedience to this unwritten code was paramount, ingrained into his psyche through years of routine. He had witnessed both the trials and triumphs of the department, but along the way, he had become entrenched in a culture that emphasized camaraderie among officers over accountability to the people they served. Opposing Jim was Oliver, a freshly minted officer, full of idealism and a keen sense of ethics. He had entered the force determined to be a force for good, believing fervently in the importance of transparency and responsibility. Every day for Oliver was not just a job, it was a chance to make a meaningful impact on the community. But as he navigated the complexities of law enforcement, he was confronted with the stark realities that permeated the department. Oliver's passion for justice clashed steadily with Jim's steadfast adherence to the brotherhood of the badge, creating an undeniable tension that grew more palpable with each passing day. One afternoon, an incident unfolded in a neighborhood fraught with tension. A minor altercation escalated when a bystander, a young man named Marcus, found himself in a confrontation with several officers. Jim, quick to respond, arrived on the scene and without hesitation, sought to assert control. His years of experience urged him to react with authority, to uphold the traditions that had long dictated police responses. Yet as he took charge, he noticed Oliver standing back, his expression a mixture of concern and frustration. The younger officer already understood that the situation required delicacy and diplomacy rather than sheer force. As shouts filled the air and the crowd began to gather, Jim barked orders, commanding compliance with a voice that had long been conditioned to ensure obedience. His authority was met with resistance, and the situation threatened to spiral out of control. Noticing the erosion of trust between the community and the officers, Oliver felt a visceral need to intervene, to defuse the tension before it erupted into chaos. He stepped forward, his voice steady but calm, attempting to speak to Marcus, hoping to bridge the growing divide. "Let's talk about this calmly. We're here to help," he said, his tone contrasting sharply with Jim's authoritative demands. Jim's eyes narrowed as he watched Oliver's approach. He felt a flicker of frustration. In his eyes, Oliver's willingness to engage with the community reflected weakness. "Oliver, step back. You're undermining the authority of the badge," Jim shouted, his words laced with an edge of anger. In that moment, the veteran's perception was clear. Obedience and strict adherence to protocol were what defined his commitment to the force. He couldn't comprehend how Oliver could prioritize connection over control, integrity over unwavering loyalty. The two stood at an impasse, embodying the broader struggle within the department and perhaps within society itself. Jim's long-held beliefs were being challenged, and in the rawness of that confrontation, Oliver felt the weight of his own convictions pressing down on him. This clash was about far more than the immediate situation. It represented a fundamental divide about what it meant to serve and protect. Was the badge a symbol of power to wield without question, or was it a reminder of the immense responsibility officers had to those they served? As tensions continued to rise, the crowd began to murmur, their gaze shifting between the two officers. Many had witnessed the behavior of police toward communities in moments of unrest, and now, they were transfixed by the very sight of two officers of the same force standing at odds. Oliver took a deep breath, trying to ground himself amid the escalating tempers. He knew he had to navigate this moment with care, not just for himself but for Marcus, who was feeling increasingly cornered and defensive. "Jim, please," Oliver said, tapping into the passion that initially drove him to the force. "This isn't just about authority. We have to show them we are on their side. We have to build trust, not destroy it." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Jim's steely facade cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of doubt. He was not entirely impervious to the shifting paradigms around him, but years under the weight of institutional expectations had cast a heavy shadow over his willingness to adapt. He found himself at a crossroads. Could he reconsider the foundations of his authority, or would he rigidly maintain a stance that established dominance rather than understanding? In that intense moment, Oliver seized the opportunity, reminding Jim of the core mission they both shared, albeit from differing perspectives. "We're a team, and that means listening to each other. Our job is to protect everyone here, not just those in uniform. If we don't start making changes, we're perpetuating a cycle that will only tear us apart," he asserted, his conviction resonating in every syllable. The crowd had grown silent, their eyes locked on the two officers as the conflict between old and new, authority and accountability, unfolded before them. Jim felt the weight of Oliver's words sink in. He was being pushed to reflect on his own choices, to confront the realities he had long evaded. The unwavering loyalty he had once held sacred was now juxtaposed with the necessity for integrity, creating an internal conflict that stirred deep within. After what felt like an eternity, Jim's posture softened slightly, and he looked at Oliver with a mix of respect and exasperation. "You really believe this is the way forward?" he asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice. It was an opening, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Oliver seized the chance to bridge the gap, offering a tentative smile. "Yes, I do. We have to engage, listen, and evolve. The communities we serve deserve better, and so do we." The discussion, fueled by their differing views on authority and integrity, continued and ignited a much-needed conversation among the gathered officers and citizens. Jim's transformation wouldn't happen overnight, but in that moment of recognition, a spark had been lit, one that held the promise of change. The divide between the two men began to close, intricately woven together by a shared commitment to a safer and more just community. As they stood side by side, they recognized the profound impact that dialogues of understanding and collaboration could have on the very fabric of the police force and their relationship with the community. While the challenges ahead would be complex, the journey toward accountability and integrity had begun, not just for Oliver or Jim, but for every officer willing to embrace the transformational path. In witnessing the collision of ideals, the community bore witness to the birth of a new era, one built on the cornerstone of trust, where authority would bend toward responsibility and where the badge would symbolize not just power, but a pledge to honor the dignity of all individuals. Together, they embodied the hope that change was possible, illuminating the road ahead for future generations within the department and the communities they served. In the heart of a city bustling with life, where the shimmering skyline met the gritty streets, the local police department stood as a pillar of authority. It was here that Derek, a dedicated officer with a strong moral compass, found himself facing an unimaginable dilemma. He had always believed in the ideals of justice and duty, but his steadfast convictions were tested on a fateful night that would forever change the course of his career and shake the very foundations of the department he cherished. The evening began like any other, a routine patrol with his partner, Officer Michael. They drove through familiar neighborhoods, exchanging banter and scanning for any signs of trouble. It was a camaraderie born of shared experience, their mutual trust forged in the fires of countless calls and late-night shifts. However, that sense of normalcy was quickly shattered when they were dispatched to respond to an altercation at a local bar, an event that would spiral out of control in ways Derek could never have anticipated. As they arrived on the scene, the air was thick with tension. A crowd had gathered outside the bar, voices raised in anger and fear. Derek could see that a fight had broken out, which had drawn the attention of surrounding patrons, and soon the police. It felt like a powder keg ready to explode, and his instincts urged him to defuse the situation before it escalated further. As he moved to assess the situation, Derek felt a sense of unease settle in his gut, an alarm bell signaling that something was profoundly off. What unfolded next would haunt him. Amid the chaos, Derek witnessed Michael, usually composed and dedicated, act aggressively toward a young man who appeared to be more frightened than threatening. The situation escalated quickly. Instead of trying to calm the crowd, Michael's voice boomed with authority as he shouted orders, escalating the tension. Derek watched in horror as his partner struck the young man, a clear overreaction to a volatile but manageable circumstance. The crowd gasped, and a deep silence fell over the area, punctured only by the distant wail of sirens. Derek's heart raced as he grappled with the unfolding reality. This was not just a lapse in judgment, it was a betrayal of the very principles they were sworn to uphold. In that moment, as adrenaline surged through his veins, Derek knew he faced an impossible choice. To remain silent would mean tacitly approving of Michael's actions, a betrayal to the oath he had taken to protect and serve the community. But to speak out against a fellow officer, his friend and partner, would undoubtedly fracture the unity within the department and put his career at risk. It could very well ignite a firestorm of repercussions, not only for himself but for the department at large. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on his conscience as he chose to act. With a voice steadied by resolve, he called out to Michael, fearlessly demanding he step back and cease his aggression. "Michael, stop. This isn't how we handle things." Derek shouted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The crowd began to murmur, their eyes darting between the two officers as the reality of the moment sank in. In his heart, Derek felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. Change was necessary, but it came at a perilous cost. In the ensuing moments, the cries from the onlookers intensified, and Derek gathered his courage to approach the unfolding situation. He pulled Michael aside, urgently insisting that the violence must end. Seeing the disbelief and anger etched into Michael's face fueled Derek's determination. "We can't do this. We can't let our emotions dictate our actions. What you did was wrong." The words hung in the air, laden with the gravity of their ramifications. Within the flash of the moment, Derek made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his life. As the other officers arrived, Derek reported the incident with unyielding clarity, detailing what had transpired with an authenticity that mirrored the conflict in his heart. The conviction in his voice laid bare the deep-seated issues that ran rampant within the department, prompting questions about loyalty and the adherence to a code that had often emphasized silence over accountability. It was a gut-wrenching choice, catalyzing a whirlwind of consequences that reverberated throughout the precinct. Investigations ensued, and as the truth unraveled, Derek found himself at the center of a storm. The department faced an overwhelming scrutiny, its credibility on the line as the magnitude of Michael's actions became widely known. Within the ranks, divisions began to form. Those who blindly supported their fellow officer stood in stark contrast to a growing number who began to rally behind Derek, recognizing the need for change. Derek's bravery to confront a colleague ignited a fierce discussion about ethics, systemic issues, and accountability within law enforcement. The fallout was swift and intense. Pundits took to the media, dissecting the incident and laying bare the complexities of policing in modern society. For Derek, the pressure mounted from every angle, his actions rippling through the department and forcing a reckoning of sorts. Officers who had once shared a camaraderie with Michael now found themselves at odds, unsure of what allegiance should look like in a profession already riddled with inherent challenges. Derek's world, once so clear-cut, was now a landscape riddled with uncertainty, suspicion, and heated debate. Communication among colleagues grew strained, whispers of dissent echoing through the precinct. Loyalty, a cornerstone of police culture, now took on an unsettling ambiguity. Derek became a symbol, a polarizing figure whose choice to uphold his commitment to integrity shattered the illusion of unity within the ranks. As the inquiry unfolded, some officers found solace in Derek's courage, rallying for reform and supporting a call for change in practices that had long been brushed under the rug. Others, however, viewed him as a traitor, an officer who had broken the unwritten rules that dictated police culture. Throughout this chaos, Derek remained steadfast, reminding himself that his responsibility was to the community he served. He spent countless nights wrestling with self-doubt, questioning whether he had made the right choice. Yet, the towering image of Michael striking that young man became his compass, reinforcing his decision in moments of uncertainty. He became an emblem of unforeseen consequences, embodying the uncomfortable truth that change often comes at a great personal cost. As days turned into weeks, the department began to reckon with the circumstances that Derek had shed light upon. Open discussions about abuse of power, racial injustice, and the need for training programs focused on de-escalation came to the forefront. What had once been a tight-knit unit began to shift, grudgingly embracing the winds of change. Officers found themselves reflecting on their roles and the necessity to cultivate accountability in their actions. The community watched closely, their reactions colored by both hope and skepticism, unsure of what transformation could truly mean. In the wake of this turmoil, Derek emerged as a leader among his peers, organizing community outreach programs aimed at restoring trust and bridging the divide between law enforcement and the citizens they served. Slowly but surely, officers began to engage in dialogue with community members, addressing concerns while acknowledging the importance of transparency in their roles. Derek understood the fragility of this newfound cooperation. It was a delicate thread woven together through a shared commitment to making the department a safe environment for all. Ultimately, Derek's courageous decision to break the silence laid bare the systemic issues within the police department, forcing a critical examination of the culture that thrived on loyalty but often fell short in accountability. It was a defining moment not just for him but for the entire institution, prompting a reflection that echoed beyond the precinct walls. Though the path to reform would be fraught with challenges, Derek recognized that lasting change was an arduous journey, one that required collective commitment, perseverance, and the courage to address uncomfortable truths. As he stood on the precipice of this metamorphosis, Derek felt a surge of determination. For every shadow of doubt that crossed his mind, there loomed a flicker of hope. Together, they were not just officers but stewards of a nascent movement, embarking on a path that promised accountability, integrity, and a deeper understanding of the communities they vowed to protect. The challenges they faced were formidable, but in the fire of adversity, they found the strength to rewrite the narrative, forging a new legacy for the department, one that embraced honesty and committed to fostering a culture that prioritized justice over blind loyalty. Derek had opened a door, and it was perhaps the most courageous act of all, to challenge the status quo and dare to believe in a future anchored in integrity and trust. In a city where the vibrant pulse of life intertwined with shadows of discontent, Officer Derek found himself grappling with the aftermath of a decision that would reverberate through the very fabric of the police department. His choice to confront his fellow officer Michael, during a moment of excess, had illuminated not only the individual's misconduct, but also the entrenched culture of silence that often shielded such behavior from scrutiny. Yet, as Derek stood at the crossroads of potential reform, he was unprepared for the fierce backlash that would emerge from his colleagues, who felt their loyalty to one another had been irreparably damaged. The days following Derek's courageous action were laden with tension. In the precinct, whispers turned into full-throttled conversations, echoing through the often indifferently sterile hallways where uniforms clustered together like sentinels of an unyielding code. Derek could feel the weight of judgment in the air, palpable in every sideways glance, every hushed tone that laced their discussions. The camaraderie that had once characterized their interactions began to erode, replaced by an undercurrent of mistrust and resentment. For many officers, Derek's actions were seen as a betrayal, an affront to the brotherhood that defined their identity. The stark reality of confronting misconduct highlighted the deep-rooted difficulties associated with tackling issues of power abuse and prejudice within a rigidly hierarchical structure. This department, like many others, had long thrived on a code of silence, an unwritten understanding that loyalty sometimes meant overlooking transgressions, whether out of fear of reprisal or a misguided sense of solidarity. Derek's challenge to this bond sent tremors through the ranks, prompting a fierce introspection among his colleagues. As he walked the precinct's corridors, Derek couldn't help but notice the palpable divide that seemed to grow with each passing day. Officers who had once sought his opinion on cases and shared laughter during quiet shifts now looked away as he approached, their expressions revealing the pain of disillusionment. Some had openly voiced their disappointment, characterizing Derek as a renegade who had jeopardized their unity. "You can't just throw one of us under the bus," muttered Officer Sanchez during a briefing, his voice thick with the weight of betrayal. Such comments showcased the rift that had formed, shattering the bonds of trust built through years of shared experiences and late-night vigils patrolling the streets. Derek, whose vision of a more transparent and accountable police force had been ignited by the incident with Michael, now faced the daunting realization of what it meant to stand alone. Each day brought new challenges, as he found himself not only battling the remnants of his own doubt, but also the anger of those who viewed his noble intentions as an attack on their way of life. The struggle to find a balance between his principles and the overwhelming wave of opposition was a formidable task, one that left him questioning the impact of his actions. Through all of this, the inherent resistance within the department was laid bare. Confronting the abuse of power necessitated addressing the unspoken prejudices and outdated perspectives that had long pervaded their culture. For Derek, it was painfully clear that the fight for accountability went beyond merely punishing inappropriate behavior. It required a fundamental shift in mindset, a transformation that seemed daunting amid an environment steeped in tradition. When Derek attempted to initiate conversations on de-escalation techniques or implicit bias training, many of his fellow officers dismissed these issues as unnecessary distractions from their primary responsibilities. They clung to the notion that their training and experience made them immune to such critiques, reinforcing an insular view that was resistant to scrutiny. Yet Derek understood that silence would enable a cycle of abuse to continue. He began to seek out allies, those within the department who shared his vision for reform. In quiet conversations and clandestine meetings, he found a small group of like-minded officers who were willing to champion change. They shared stories of their own experiences, recounting moments when they had struggled with the pervasive culture of complicity. Derek listened intently, absorbing their insights as they collectively envisioned a path forward, one that would foster accountability rather than sidestep it. However, overcoming the entrenched biases and fears of reprisal was no easy feat. Derek soon learned that many of his colleagues were reluctant to voice their concerns for fear of being ostracized. The very notion of dissent had been demonized, incentivizing silence. As he pushed for change, he often felt like he was navigating a minefield, unsure of when the next explosive rebuttal would erupt. The price of his conviction became increasingly apparent. Those who dared to challenge the status quo faced isolation, ridicule, and occasionally, even threats. In the weeks that followed, Derek witnessed the complexities of change unfold in real time. There were moments of progress, but they were often met with harsh backlash. Town hall meetings meant to facilitate discussions about reform became battlegrounds, where tensions flared and emotions ran high. Officers who once echoed camaraderie now stood in stark opposition, passionately defending the status quo while branding those who sought change as troublemakers. Derek's presence in those meetings served as a catalyst for intense debate, but he remained resolute in his belief that silence could no longer be the norm. The emotional toll of this upheaval weighed heavily on Derek's shoulders. He found himself caught in a cyclical battle between hope and despair as every step forward seemed tempered by disillusionment. Yet, even as colleagues turned their backs on him in the halls, he continued to seek pathways to foster dialogue. With a deep-seated commitment to his mission, he recognized that addressing systemic issues required monumental courage and resilience, not just from himself but from everyone who aspired to create a better future for the community they served. It became increasingly evident that the process of reform would not be instantaneous. Rather, it demanded persistent effort and a willingness to embrace the discomfort that accompanied the necessary conversations about accountability and responsibility. As Derek navigated this terrain, he began to see the potential within the cracks of resistance, a glimmer of hope that perhaps together, they could cultivate a culture that valued integrity and transparency over blind loyalty. The journey was neither linear nor easy. The pain of division within the department gnawed at him, and the weight of betrayal lodged itself deep in his heart. On some days, the struggle felt insurmountable, as if the institution he had committed his life to was intent on resisting change. However, he drew strength from the knowledge that resisting complacency meant shining a light on the shadows that often obscured the truth. He was determined to hold himself accountable while encouraging others to do the same. Derek's resolve became a beacon for those officers willing to stand alongside him. As they continued to grow in number, their collective determination started to resonate throughout the precinct. Conversations once mired in anger began to transform into constructive dialogues where the bond of brotherhood was redefined. Slowly but surely, his efforts catalyzed a fundamental shift in how they perceived accountability and bias. Through an arduous journey of conflict and reconciliation, Derek etched his beliefs into the very narrative of the department. The power of confronting abuse and prejudice, once cloaked in silence, began to wield its transformative capacity. He understood that the fight against systemic issues was not purely about changing policies. It was fundamentally about cultivating a culture willing to embrace vulnerability, to question the norms that had long gone unchallenged. Ultimately, Derek's unyielding commitment to confront abuse of power and prejudice bore fruit, igniting a spark of change that dared others to follow. Together, they forged a new path, one where the principles of justice and integrity took precedence over the loyalty that once demanded silence. While challenges lay ahead, the seeds of transformation had been planted, and the time for reckoning had finally arrived. In the end, Derek learned that true courage often lies not in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to confront it for the sake of a profound and necessary change. The tension in the precinct had reached a boiling point, with divisions growing deeper and trust faltering. Officers had chosen sides, and the air was thick with animosity. It was in this charged atmosphere that Chief Montgomery entered the fray, a seasoned leader with a keen sense of what was at stake. Montgomery had seen his share of challenges throughout his long career on the force, but the rift that had formed in his department was unlike anything he had encountered before. He understood that the fissures created by recent events threatened not only the cohesion of the officers, but also the integrity of the entire department. Chief Montgomery was known for his no-nonsense approach, but he was also admired for his ability to listen and engage. He recognized that addressing the growing animosity required a delicate touch, one that honored the feelings and perspectives of every officer, no matter their stance. Montgomery's first step was to call a department-wide meeting, an opportunity for open dialogue that would serve as a platform for both sides to voice their concerns. He knew that genuine communication was essential for healing the deep-seated wounds that had formed. As the officers gathered in the conference room, Montgomery's presence commanded attention. His tall, sturdy frame exuded authority, but it was his compassion that truly captured the room. "I understand that we are facing a crucial moment in our department's history," he said, his voice steady, yet warm. "What has unfolded over the past several weeks has brought to light the complexities of our roles as officers, and it is imperative that we confront these challenges head-on." The quiet murmur that followed indicated that many were listening, even if they were hesitant to fully engage. Montgomery emphasized that the division among the ranks was not merely a personal conflict between Derek and his colleagues, but a symptom of a broader issue that had long plagued the department. He spoke candidly about the need for accountability and the importance of navigating the balance between loyalty to one another and allegiance to the principles of justice they swore to uphold. His words articulated a truth that many officers had felt but had struggled to express fully. Yet Montgomery also acknowledged the emotions at play, the sense of betrayal felt by those who believed Derek's actions had undermined their unity. "When one of us speaks out, it can feel like an assault on the brotherhood we cherish," he said, looking around the room as he gauged the reactions of his subordinates. "But we must remember that brotherhood does not thrive in silence when we know injustices are occurring." His words struck a chord, resonating with some officers while prompting resistance in others. Montgomery understood that change would not come easily, but he was unwavering in his belief that it was possible. In the weeks that followed the meeting, Montgomery took it upon himself to facilitate smaller discussion groups where officers could express their feelings more openly. He was determined to create a safe space where each officer could speak without fear of judgment or retribution. In these meetings, he encouraged vulnerability and honesty, guiding conversations that often meandered through complex emotional territory. Some officers opened up about their struggles with the culture of silence that had been perpetuated for years, fearing the repercussions of speaking out. Others grappled with the feeling that Derek had put their careers in jeopardy. Montgomery listened intently, his presence a calming force amidst the swirling chaos. He empathized with their experiences, but gently reminded them of the greater purpose behind their roles. He shared stories from his own journey, reflecting on times when he, too, had navigated adversity and uncomfortable truths within the department. "This isn't just about you or me, it's about the communities we serve," Montgomery implored. "We owe it to them to be better." His words carried weight, threading a sense of purpose into the hearts of those who were hesitant to accept change. Slowly, Montgomery's approach began to bear fruit. The meetings evolved into collaborative workshops focused on training that embraced concepts of accountability, transparency, and ethical policing. These sessions, led by officers who shared Derek's vision for reform, drew in participants from both sides of the divide. Through interactive exercises and candid discussions, they began to dismantle the walls that had previously divided them. Montgomery watched as former adversaries began to grapple with their biases and reassess their understandings of loyalty and justice. The signs of progress were subtle at first, but they were there. Officers began to engage more readily in conversations about reform, exploring how their actions could align with a broader commitment to community service. The stark contrast to the days of finger-pointing and resentment was palpable. Montgomery's leadership had unlocked a renewed sense of camaraderie, emphasizing that they were all ultimately united by their vow to protect citizens, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable realities together. As the officers continued to evolve, Montgomery recognized that solidifying these changes would require continuous effort and leadership. He initiated regular check-ins to monitor progress and address lingering concerns, ensuring that no one felt sidelined in the pursuit of transition. The foundation of trust that was built in those initial meetings was now being reinforced, and as Derek stepped into this new environment with cautious optimism, he felt a shift within him as well. Montgomery's steering of the department did not go unnoticed outside the precinct. The community began to sense a change as officers became more approachable, and a commitment to transparency became apparent in their actions. As local residents engaged with officers on the streets, they noted a more human touch, a willingness to listen and learn rather than to judge or impose. The potential for a stronger, more connected relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served was blossoming. Of course, challenges remained. Moments of doubt still crept in, particularly from officers who felt that change was an unwelcome threat to their identity. Yet, Montgomery remained steadfast, knowing that setbacks were part of any meaningful transformation. He encouraged open dialogues about these feelings, reinforcing that it was natural to feel unease when grappling with significant shifts in mindset. Under Montgomery's guidance, the department fostered a culture of reflection and growth. The focus began shifting towards enhancing training on de-escalation techniques and bias recognition, creating a more proactive approach to preventing the types of incidents that had led to Derek's initial confrontation with Michael. The department began to exemplify not just a commitment to law enforcement, but to being accountable citizens of the very communities they were sworn to protect. As the months passed, the changes that Montgomery had championed began to take root in the precinct's culture. Officers grew less hesitant to speak out against misconduct and more willing to offer help to their peers struggling with the pressures of their roles. Trust began to flourish, and the relationships among officers shifted from one of fear and resentment to one of mutual respect and understanding. Ultimately, the intervention of Chief Montgomery became a linchpin in the department's evolution. He guided the officers through the storm, encouraging them to embrace introspection while fostering a renewed sense of purpose. The once divided precinct had begun to heal, forging a new identity rooted in accountability, community trust, and collaborative growth. The journey was far from over, but Montgomery had successfully planted the seeds for an enduring transformation, one that balanced the tenets of brotherhood with a commitment to maintain the highest standards of ethical policing. Officers like Derek, who was initially viewed with skepticism, were now recognized as pivotal change agents, embodying the spirit of reform that was crucial for the department's future. In the end, Montgomery taught the officers that true leadership lies not in directing from above, but in nurturing a community of voices willing to strive for something greater than themselves. His intervention had sparked a movement toward progress that promised to redefine not just how they policed, but also how they viewed themselves and their duty to those they served. As the precinct moved into its next chapter, it did so united in purpose, a collective effort toward integrity, community engagement, and ultimately transformational justice.